The Vanguard emerged from the depths of space like a silent predator, its sleek, jagged silhouette cutting through the starry abyss. To the crew aboard, it felt like stepping into the unknown. An ocean of space stretching out before them, uncharted and full of potential. Captain Mara Blackwell stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the distant glimmer of the Ivar homeworld. The galaxy had been at peace, at least for those who held power. The Invaders, a race of towering, armored beings, had long been the apex predators in the universe, conquering and enslaving other species with their military might. But humanity, with its boundless curiosity and ambition, had disrupted that delicate balance. "We're nearing their border, Captain," reported Lieutenant Connor, his voice steady but laced with a hint of tension. "Sensors indicate a heavy presence of Ivar patrols." Blackwell nodded, unfazed. "Bring us into position. We move quickly, and we move decisively. This is our moment." The Ivar were expecting an invasion. They were prepared for one, but they were not prepared for the humans' methods that defied logic and their understanding of warfare. Humanity was unpredictable, inventive, and unwilling to fight on anyone else's terms. The Ivar relied on rigid tactics, heavy firepower, overwhelming numbers, and sheer force. Humans, on the other hand, would fight with their ingenuity and relentless drive. As the Vanguard slid into a stealth position just outside the Ivar's detection range, Blackwell's mind raced. She wasn't about to engage in a direct confrontation, not yet. She needed the element of surprise. She turned to her second-in-command, Commander Roland Hayes. "Initiate the first phase of the plan. Ghost Protocol." Hayes gave a sharp nod, and the crew sprang into action. The Vanguard deployed dozens of small, decoy drones that mimicked the appearance of Ivar ships. These drones were equipped with jamming devices that caused complete chaos within the enemy sensors. To the Ivar, it looked like an entire fleet was approaching, but it was nothing more than an illusion, a clever ruse. The Ivar fleet, already on high alert, began to scramble, sending ships to intercept what they believed was a massive human invasion force. They fell right into the trap. "What the hell is this?" a Ivar captain barked, his voice thick with disbelief as his sensors detected the anomaly. His fleet was splitting up, engaging phantom ships that vanished as quickly as they appeared. On the Vanguard, Blackwell allowed herself a small smile. The first stage was working perfectly. The Ivar were falling into disarray. Now it was time to strike. "Phase 2, Blackwell commanded. The real Vanguard, concealed in the dark void behind the rift, unleashed a rapid barrage of EMP missiles. These weapons didn't explode. They unleashed a powerful, targeted electromagnetic pulse that disabled the Ivar's communication systems and sent their ships into a temporary blackout. The Ivar fleet, cut off from one another, were now isolated, vulnerable, and confused. "Now we move," Blackwell said coldly. The Vanguard surged forward, her engines roaring as they pushed through the space once held by the Ivar. Her weapon systems fired with brutal precision, tearing through enemy vessels. Their shields faltered, their coordination was shattered, and the Ivar found themselves unable to respond to the relentless onslaught. On the bridge, the crew cheered as the first Ivar destroyer was torn apart, its massive hull rupturing in a burst of fire and debris. But Blackwell knew this was just the beginning. The true battle hadn't even begun yet. As the Vanguard pushed deeper into enemy space, Blackwell's thoughts remained focused. This was not just a fight for territory. This was the first step in a new order, a galaxy where humanity would no longer be the hunted, but the hunters. The Ivar had no idea what they had just unleashed. The initial shock had passed, but the Ivar were far from defeated. They may have been caught off guard by the humans' unconventional tactics, but they were far from powerless. Their response was swift and brutal. The Vanguard had only dealt a minor blow, but it had opened a wound in the Ivar's pride. And that wound would not go unanswered. The first Ivar retaliation came just hours after the initial assault. A fleet of battle cruisers, led by the renowned General Vracker, was dispatched to hunt down the human ship. Vracker had long been known for his ruthlessness and strategic genius, and the Wyvar believed that only his expertise could quell this unexpected threat. "Captain," Lieutenant Connor's voice interrupted Blackwell's thoughts. "Ivar fleet detected. They're coming in hot, heading straight for us. Prepare the crew for battle," Blackwell ordered, though she remained calm. "Let's see what they've got." The Ivar ships were massive, their sleek, dark hulls adorned with sharp angular lines that spoke of an ancient, brutal design. Their weaponry was among the most advanced in the galaxy, lasers capable of cutting through even the toughest shields, kinetic missiles that could devastate entire fleets with a single hit. But humanity was ready. The Vanguard had been modified with the latest in human tech, an adaptive shield matrix, stealth cloaking, and multi-targeting missile systems that no Ivar had encountered before. Blackwell knew the first engagement wouldn't be won through sheer force. It would be won through finesse, patience, and misdirection. "Initiate the second phase," Blackwell ordered, her voice steady. "Send out decoys, and prep the EMPs." The decoys, small drum ships designed to mimic human warships, shot out from the Vanguard, weaving erratically through space. They were designed not just to confuse the enemy, but to provide critical data on the Wyvar fleet's weaknesses. As the Wyvar ships locked onto them, Blackwell's team monitored their movements, identifying weak points in the Wyvar's formation. The Wyvar fleet, now split and disorganized, closed in. But this time, they didn't have the element of surprise. They were charging headlong into the trap. "Activate Phase 3. Light them up." The Vanguard sprang to life as its missile systems fired in rapid succession, each warhead targeting a different Ivar vessel. Unlike the first barrage, which had been a test, this one was devastating. The missiles released streams of plasma and guided energy pulses, smashing through the Wyvar ship's shields with terrifying precision. Explosions lit up the void, and several of the Wyvar battle cruisers were already disabled, drifting helplessly in space, their engines ruined and their weapons offline. Vracker's fleet was faltering. The human tactics were unconventional, unpredictable, and far more effective than they had anticipated. The Ivar had never fought an enemy like this, an enemy that used misdirection, trickery, and relentless precision, rather than brute force. "Do you think this will stop us, humans?" Vracker's voice boomed through the comms, his words laced with venom. "We will crush you beneath our heels. Your victory is a fleeting illusion." But Blackwell was undeterred. She knew the true strength of humanity didn't lie in numbers or raw firepower. It lay in their ability to adapt and innovate on the fly, to think in ways no one else had imagined. "You don't understand." Blackwell's voice crackled back over the comms. "You never understood us. We don't back down. We don't give up. And we never stop fighting." With a final, decisive blow, the Vanguard launched a barrage of EMP missiles, crippling the remaining Ivar ships and sending them into disarray. The human warship, agile and adaptive, moved in for the kill. Vracker's flagship, the Onyx Dominion, was the last standing. As it fired its final desperate volley, Blackwell's ship was already in motion, dodging with grace and accuracy. The humans had won the battle again. But there was no time for celebration. The Ivar Empire would not let this go unanswered. Their pride had been wounded, and they would strike back with everything they had. This was only the beginning. "Prepare for the next wave," Blackwell ordered. "They'll be back, and next time, they'll be angrier." As the wreckage of the Ivar fleet drifted in the cold vacuum of space, the humans aboard the Vanguard celebrated a hard-won victory. But Captain Blackwell could not shake the feeling that this was merely a prelude to something far more dangerous. The Ivar were not like the other empires they had encountered. They were a species built on domination, and they would not go quietly into defeat. The initial skirmishes had only scratched the surface. "Captain, we've got incoming transmissions," Lieutenant Connor reported. It's from our ally, the defected Ivar general. Blackwell's eyes narrowed. This was the key to unraveling the Uvar's grip on the galaxy. The defector, General Zivok, had provided crucial intelligence about the inner workings of the Ivar Empire. Humanity's victory depended on this knowledge. But Blackwell couldn't ignore the suspicion that lingered. Zivok's loyalty was still a question mark. "Patch it through," Blackwell said, her voice unwavering. The image of Zivok appeared on the holoscreen, a towering Ivar figure with armored plating and glowing blue eyes. His expression, however, lacked the haughty confidence typical of his species. Instead, there was a sense of regret in his gaze. "You've made an impact, Captain Blackwell," Zivok began, his voice deep and measured. "But you need to understand this war is not about territory. It's about survival and control. The Ivar are not the true masters of the galaxy. We serve an older, far more dangerous power." Blackwell leaned forward. "What are you talking about? The Ivar are an empire. They've conquered dozens of species. You're saying they're not the top." Zivok's eyes flickered with something. Fear, perhaps. The Ivar were never the true conquerors. They're merely pawns, just like the others. The real power lies in a secret alliance, one that has been manipulating galactic events for millennia. They use the Uvar to enforce their will. "Who?" Blackwell pressed. "Who is this force?" Zivok's jaw clenched. "The Asian. They are ancient beings who control the minds of entire species. The Uivar's empire was built on their technology, and they are the ones who've kept the galaxy in line for centuries." Blackwell's heart raced. She had heard whispers of the Asian, but nothing solid, nothing concrete. An ancient race, a shadow force pulling the strings behind the galaxy's major powers. If the Asian existed and controlled the Uivar, then everything humanity had fought for, every victory, every strategic move, was part of a much larger game. "So the Ivar aren't just a threat. They're a tool," Blackwell muttered. "A tool for the Asian to maintain their grip on the galaxy." Zivok nodded. "Exactly. And their influence is spreading. They have agents within nearly every major empire, including yours. The human resistance, it's the only hope for the galaxy. But you cannot defeat the Uvar without taking down the Asian." The weight of his words hung in the air. Blackwell knew this was more than just a fight for survival. It was a battle for the very soul of the galaxy. If the Asian were indeed pulling the strings, then the fate of every species was hanging by a thread. "Tell me what I need to do," she said, her voice firm. "How do we stop them?" Zivok's face darkened. "You need to find the heart of Vakesh, the Uivar's capital. Deep within its core is the Asian's central nexus, a device capable of controlling the minds of entire populations. Destroy it, and you will sever the Asian's hold on the galaxy." Blackwell turned to her crew, who were listening intently. "Set course for Vakesh," she commanded. "Prepare for a full-scale assault. If Zivok is right, then we don't just need to win a battle. We need to destroy a legacy that has lasted for centuries." Her mind raced as she pondered the enormity of their mission. Taking down the Asian's nexus would be no easy feat. Vakesh was heavily fortified, its core protected by layers of alien technology and Ivar forces. The stakes had just become even higher. The fight wasn't just against the Uivar anymore. It was against the very force that had shaped the galaxy into its current form. The humans were no longer simply invaders. They were the last hope for the galaxy's freedom. "Let's get to work," Blackwell said, steely resolve in her voice. "The Asian will learn what it means to be." The Vanguard cut through space like a phantom, its dark silhouette slipping past the outskirts of Ivar-controlled space, drawing closer to Vakesh, the heart of the Ivar Empire. Captain Blackwell's mind raced as the enormity of their mission sank in. The path ahead was fraught with unimaginable danger, and the price of failure was too high to contemplate. But there was no turning back. Humanity's best chance at victory lay within the core of Vakesh itself. Approaching Vakesh in 20 minutes, Lieutenant Connor reported, his voice taut with anticipation. Blackwell stood at the helm, hands clasped behind her back. She had lived through many battles, seen countless enemies fall. But this was different. They weren't just attacking an empire. They were taking on an ancient, galaxy-spanning conspiracy, one whose tendrils reached deep into the fabric of galactic politics. To face the Asian was to challenge the very balance of power that had existed for centuries. "Commander Hayes, status report on our fleet," she asked, turning to her second-in-command. Hayes didn't hesitate. "All ships are in position, Captain. The fleet's ready, but we're dealing with the most heavily fortified planet we've ever faced. The Ivar have already begun deploying defensive arrays along the outskirts of Vakesh, and I suspect they're preparing a final stand." "Expect the worst," Blackwell replied, her voice low. "This will be a fight for survival. If the Ivar are protecting the Asian's nexus, we have to be quick. We won't get a second chance." The tension in the air was palpable, even amongst the crew. They knew what was at stake. A single misstep could spell the end not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. As the Vanguard moved deeper into Ivar space, the first wave of enemy forces appeared. Dozens of Ivar warships, their weapons primed, closing in. Their presence was an ominous harbinger, a reminder that their enemy wasn't going to make this easy. "Deploy decoys and initiate evasive maneuvers," Blackwell ordered. The Vanguard sprang into action, releasing a wave of drone ships that scattered into the path of the Ivar forces. As the drones mimicked the Vanguard signature, the Ivar ships hesitated, momentarily unsure of what to engage. It was just enough time for the Vanguard to break through the defensive perimeter, its sleek frame darting past enemy fire. The battle erupted around them in a flurry of explosions, plasma fire, and shattered ships. The humans had the advantage of speed and cunning, but the Ivar had sheer firepower on their side. The warships were relentless, cutting through the decoys like blades through paper, but the real prize, the Vanguard, had already slipped through the net. "Captain, we're entering Vakesh's atmosphere," Connor announced. "Ivar forces are mobilizing on the surface. We have minutes before their reinforcements arrive." Blackwell nodded grimly. The real test was just beginning. The Vanguard sliced through Vakesh's dense atmosphere, flanked by the rest of the human fleet. Blackwell could see the glowing cityscape below, the towering spires of Ivar architecture cutting through the swirling clouds like ancient obelisks. The ground forces had begun their assault as well. Human ground units, accompanied by the defected Ivar forces who had joined the rebellion, stormed the surface with unrelenting force. "Move fast. We need to reach the core before the Ivar can mount a full-scale defense," Blackwell said, eyes fixed on the colossal city in the distance. "Hayes, what's the status of our ground units?" "They're securing the perimeter of the Nexus chamber as we speak. We'll have an opening in 30 minutes, Hayes replied, his voice steady. "But there's something unusual happening." Blackwell's brow furrowed. "Unusual? What do you mean?" "Energy readings from the Nexus. They're fluctuating, almost as if they're aware of us," Hayes said, eyes narrowing. "We've never encountered anything like this before." That was all the warning Blackwell needed. She gripped the command chair tightly. The Asian knew they were coming, and they were prepared. "We're walking into a trap," she muttered under her breath. "Brace for impact, everyone. This is going to be a hell of a fight." As they descended deeper into Vakesh, the ground trembled with the arrival of Ivar reinforcements. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the humans fought tooth and nail against an army of desperate Ivar soldiers. But Blackwell's crew, humanity's finest, held their ground. They fought like wolves, moving with brutal efficiency and ferocity. And then, when they reached the heart of Vakesh, the unimaginable happened. The Asian's Nexus, a gargantuan structure of gleaming black metal and pulsating energy, stood before them like an unholy shrine. The room was massive, filled with alien symbols and runes that hummed with an ancient, malevolent energy. It was here, in the heart of the Ivar Empire, that the last and most critical battle would be fought. Blackwell's pulse quickened as she felt the power radiating from the Nexus, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Destroy it, and the Wyver, and their masters, the Asian, would fall. But there was something unsettling about the Nexus, a pull, a darkness she could not quite shake. The final battle was upon them, and it was far from over. The Wyver had one last card to play, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The Nexus chamber was a silent, ominous place. The sheer size of the structure was breathtaking, towering above them like a twisted monument to power. The walls were covered in alien symbols that seemed to shift and writhe as though alive, reacting to their presence. The air hummed with a low, unnatural vibration, a sound that reverberated in their bones. Captain Blackwell's eyes scanned the chamber, her hand resting on the hilt of her sidearm. The ground beneath them was solid, yet there was an undeniable feeling that the entire place was unstable, like a volcano on the verge of eruption. The rest of the crew moved cautiously behind her, eyes alert for any signs of movement. But the room was eerily quiet, save for the strange hum of the Nexus. The Vanguard's ground forces, a mix of elite human soldiers and the defected Lyvar rebels, held their weapons tightly. No one spoke, each of them keenly aware of the gravity of the situation. "We're almost there," Commander Hayes said, his voice tight with controlled anticipation. "The central core is just ahead. We should be able to plant the charge in 10 minutes. Blackwell nodded but didn't feel the relief she should have. Her instincts were screaming at her that something was wrong. The energy readings from the Nexus had spiked earlier, and now, as they stood at its very doorstep, she could feel it in the air, the sensation of being watched. "Hold," Blackwell ordered, raising a hand. "Something's not right." Suddenly, the hum in the room deepened, turning into a low, almost guttural sound that seemed to come from all directions. A blinding flash of light erupted from the Nexus, and the entire chamber shook. The walls, once static, began to pulse with a sickly glow. The ground trembled, and Blackwell's eyes widened as a vortex of dark energy tore open in the center of the room. The atmosphere thickened, warping with an unnatural force. From within the vortex, shadowy figures began to emerge, tall, ethereal forms with eyes that glowed like the void itself. They were Asian. The rumors were true. The Asian were not merely manipulative masterminds, but beings of pure dark energy, ancient and malevolent. Their presence distorted everything around them, and their gaze was like a pressure on Blackwell's chest, threatening to crush her will. The soldiers reacted immediately, raising their weapons and opening fire, but their bullets seemed to pass through the Asian as if they were nothing more than smoke, leaving no trace of injury. The figures moved fluidly, their glowing eyes scanning the humans, as though sizing them up for something far more sinister. "Humans, you think you can defeat us?" The voice was like 1,000 whispers, reverberating through the chamber and directly into their minds. It was chilling in its precision, yet devoid of any emotion. "We have ruled the galaxy for eons. You are nothing but insects, squirming in the dirt." Blackwell's heart pounded as the full gravity of the situation dawned on her. The Asian were not just invincible, they were the true puppeteers of the galaxy. The Vyvar were their tools, their soldiers, but the Asian were the architects of the galaxy's unspoken hierarchy. And now, it seemed they were ready to wipe out humanity for daring to challenge their dominion. But Blackwell would not bend. Not now. She clenched her jaw and activated the comm on her wrist. "Lieutenant Connor, prepare the EMP device. We need to disable the Nexus. Now." Connor's voice crackled back through the comm. "Captain, the Nexus is feeding off the energy from these entities. It's almost like the Asian are directly tied to the core itself. I don't think we can destroy it with conventional methods." "Then we'll find another way," Blackwell said, her voice hard with determination. "Commander Hayes, bring up the backup charges. We'll need a full-scale disruption." But Hayes was already looking at the Asian, his face pale. "Captain, there's something else. The Asian, They're not just energy. They're consciousness. I think they're trying to take control of our minds." Blackwell's blood ran cold. As the Asian moved closer, their presence grew heavier. It felt like an oppressive weight on her very soul, as though they were probing her thoughts, searching for her deepest fears. But Blackwell was trained. She fought back the intrusion, pushing away the dark whispers that tried to slither into her mind. "Stay focused," Blackwell barked. "We don't have time for this. We fight or we die." The soldiers, their minds fighting against the Asian's influence, held firm. They were humanity's best, and they would not falter. But the Asian were everywhere now, their dark forms coiling through the air like smoke, their eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. Then, in the center of the chamber, a voice boomed louder than the rest. The leader of the Asian. "You think you can disrupt our plan? You are too late. The Nexus is a part of us. And you are already ours." With that, a blinding flash of light enveloped the room, and Blackwell felt her mind slip for just a moment. She shook her head violently, her grip on her weapon tightening. There was no room for fear. The battle for the galaxy had just begun. The chamber was consumed by an eerie stillness as the Asian leader's words echoed through Blackwell's mind. The light from the Nexus pulsed, bathing everything in its cold, unnatural glow. She gritted her teeth, struggling to hold onto her focus as the alien presence pressed against her mind, like 1,000 invisible hands trying to pry her thoughts open. "Stay with me, everyone," she shouted, shaking off the disorienting haze. Her voice was the anchor they needed, a reminder that they were not alone in this fight. But the Asian were relentless. Their ethereal forms flowed like shadows, moving effortlessly through the air, their eyes now fixed on each of the humans. Every step they took seemed to drain the air from the room, suffocating the soldiers with an overwhelming sense of dread. The leader of the Asian spoke again, its voice reverberating through the chamber. "Your resistance is futile, Captain Blackwell. You cannot destroy what has existed for eons. The Nexus is our link, our power, and your minds are already under our influence. It is only a matter of time before we control you fully." Blackwell's breath quickened as the pressure built within her chest, her thoughts beginning to blur. She could feel the pull, the temptation to surrender, to let the darkness take over. But deep down, she knew she would not, succumb to this force. Humanity's survival depended on it. "Hayes," she barked, trying to break through the fog. "Where are those backup charges?" Commander Hayes was kneeling next to the central core of the Nexus, frantically connecting wires and muttering to himself as he fought against the rising tide of mental interference. "Just a few more seconds, Captain." But before he could finish, a piercing shriek reverberated throughout the chamber, and the Asian leader's figure twisted and shifted, its dark form becoming more solid. It lunged forward, extending a hand toward Hayes. "No," Blackwell yelled, charging forward without thinking. Her pistol in hand, she fired at the Asian leader, but the shots passed through it, leaving no mark. The creature only laughed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "Your weapons are useless, human," it sneered. "You cannot defeat us with mere metal and fire. We are beyond your comprehension." With a flick of its wrist, the Asian leader sent Blackwell flying backward, crashing into a wall with a sickening thud. Pain exploded through her side, but she forced herself to her feet. She couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. Hayes, still struggling with the wires, looked up at her, his eyes wide with desperation. "Captain, we're running out of time. This device is the key. If we don't disable it now, the Asian will take control of the entire galaxy." Blackwell's mind raced as she pushed herself upright, ignoring the pain in her body. The Asian were not just invincible, they were manipulating the very fabric of reality, using the Nexus as a conduit to control and enslave entire civilizations. But they had underestimated one crucial thing: humanity's will to fight. "Connor," Blackwell said through gritted teeth, "do you have the EMP device ready?" A crackling response came over the comm. "Ready, Captain. Just say the word." Her eyes locked onto the Nexus core, which was now glowing with an unnatural intensity. It pulsed as though it had a life of its own, feeding off the Asian's power. If they didn't act fast, it would be too late. "Activate the EMP now," Blackwell ordered, her voice unwavering despite the chaos around her. The sudden surge of electromagnetic energy from the EMP was like a shockwave, rattling the entire chamber. The Asian recoiled in unison, their forms flickering as the pulse of energy coursed through the room. The Nexus trembled, and the glowing symbols on its surface began to distort and crack. Blackwell didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward Hayes, who was still struggling with the last of the charges. With a sharp motion, she yanked the wires free, pressing the detonator into his hand. "Do it," she said, her voice low but resolute. Hayes didn't need any further encouragement. He slammed his fist down on the detonator, and the entire chamber erupted in a blinding explosion of light. For a moment, everything went white. Blackwell's vision blurred, and she felt her body being thrown backward by the force of the blast. The room seemed to collapse around her, the ground shaking violently as the Nexus, its link to the Asian, was severed. Then the light faded. The humming of the Nexus stopped, and the oppressive weight of the Asian's influence lifted, like a fog dissipating. The chamber was eerily quiet, the darkness lifting for the first time in what felt like ages. Breathing heavily, Blackwell slowly pushed herself up from the ground. Her head spun, and the remnants of the Asian's presence still lingered at the edges of her mind. But she was free. They were free. Around her, the soldiers stirred, shaking off the disorienting effects of the Asian's control. Some were battered, others bruised, but they were all standing. The Nexus was gone, and with it, the Asian's grip on the galaxy had been shattered. But as Blackwell looked around the devastated chamber, she knew their victory was not without cost. The battle for the galaxy had only just begun. The Wyvar would come for them. And worse, the Asian might not be as defeated as they hoped. "Get to the surface," Blackwell commanded, her voice steady. "We've taken the first step, but we're not done yet. Let's finish this." And with that, the fight for the galaxy's future continued, humanity's resolve harder than ever. The skies above Vakesh boiled with fire and smoke. Human warships, still locked in furious combat with Wyvar defenders, strafed the surface with precise barrages of plasma and railgun fire. The planet trembled under the weight of war, its once pristine towers now broken monuments to an empire in collapse. Captain Blackwell emerged from the ruins of the Nexus chamber, covered in ash and streaked with blood. Her armor was scorched, one arm hanging limp from the shoulder, but her eyes still burned with defiance. "Status report," she demanded, staggering into the mobile command center hastily deployed by Vanguard's Marines. Lieutenant Connor met her halfway, a cut running across his forehead. EMP pulse hit every system in a 100-kilometer radius. Ivor communications are down, and their ground forces are in disarray. We've pushed them back from the city center, but we've got a new problem. Blackwell narrowed her eyes. "What kind of problem?" Connor hesitated, then held out a datapad. "We picked up something after the Nexus went down. A signal, buried deep under the surface of Vakesh. It's not Iver. It's something older." The datapad displayed a waveform pulsing with eerie regularity. Blackwell stared at it in silence. The signal's cadence was almost like speech, structured, deliberate. It wasn't random. It was a message. "Has anyone deciphered it?" she asked. "We ran it through every linguistic AI in the fleet. It's pre-galactic standard. Pre-everything. But one phrase keeps popping up." Connor tapped the screen again, revealing a single translated line in bold red. "The architects awaken." Blackwell exhaled slowly, a chill running down her spine. "I thought the Asian were the architects." "Apparently not," Connor said grimly. "The Asian were just the wardens. Something else is buried here. Something worse. The timing made sense. The moment the nexus fell, the seal it maintained must have broken. And now, beneath the crust of Vakesh, the true masters of the Asian, of the entire manipulation of the galactic balance, were stirring. "We have to get to that signal source," Blackwell said, "before it's too late." Within the hour, a specialized drop team was assembled. Blackwell, Hayes, Connor, and a squad of elite soldiers. They descended into the planet's crust through ancient tunnels revealed by the collapsing nexus. The air grew colder and stranger with every step. The stone walls were carved with symbols that shimmered faintly, as though remembering a time long past. At the lowest level, the team found a sealed chamber, a colossal vault door inscribed with glyphs that none of their translators could decode. But they all understood one thing: this wasn't a door to a tomb. It was a cage. Suddenly, a tremor shook the earth. The symbols flared with light, and the door began to slide open. "No," whispered Hayes, backing away. "We didn't stop them. We freed them." Inside the chamber, a silhouette stirred, massive, serpentine, and wreathed in dark light. Eyes like collapsing stars blinked open one by one, and a voice far deeper than the Asian, ancient as the void itself, rolled into their minds. At last, the cycle breaks, and the harvest begins again. The architects had awoken, and the war for the galaxy was about to reach its final, terrifying stage. The chamber shuddered under the weight of the thing that now stirred. The architects, no longer myth, no longer whispers in the dark corners of forbidden data, had awakened. Captain Blackwell stood motionless, facing the impossible. The creature before her wasn't like the Asian, whose forms were insidious and ghost-like. This was ancient, colossal, real. Its immense body coiled through the vault like a serpent carved from obsidian and starlight. Its skin was a shifting canvas of cosmic symbols, as though the fabric of the universe had been etched into its very being. And it was watching them. "We've made a mistake," Connor whispered, trembling, his voice barely audible over the low-frequency hum reverberating through the floor. "This isn't a war anymore. It's extinction protocol." "No," Blackwell said coldly, her eyes locked on the architect. "This is exactly what they feared." Hayes turned to her, confused. "Who?" "The Asian. The Wyvar. All of them. That's why they tried to control the galaxy. To keep this buried." The architect uncoiled slightly, its body shifting with slow, deliberate grace. The booming resonance filled the air. Its voice, but not in words. It spoke in concepts, in emotions, in truths pressed directly into the minds of the humans. "You are anomalies. Unbound. Unshaped. A fire in the dark. We watched the galaxy bend under false shepherds. Now, it breaks. You are not welcome, but you are necessary." Blackwell stepped forward, unfazed. "You've been asleep too long to know who we are. We're not anomalies. We're evolution." The architect tilted its massive head, and the sensation that followed was almost curiosity. "You claim dominion. You, forged from chaos. You would challenge entropy itself." "I don't care about dominion," she growled. "I care about freedom and survival. And if you're planning to put chains back on this galaxy, you're going to have to kill every last human first." A pause. Then a low rumble that could have been laughter or a warning. "Then we test your resolve, Fireborn." Suddenly, energy surged from the walls. Beams of light carved into the air, forming hard-like constructs, creatures made of energy and armor, reflections of the architect's will. Dozens. Hundreds. A trial. "Contact," Hayes shouted. "Defensive formation." The chamber erupted into chaos. Bullets, plasma, kinetic blades. Everything humanity had was hurled at the architect's guardians. The fight was brutal and fast. Blackwell fired relentlessly, moving like a storm, her pain forgotten in the flood of adrenaline. Connor went down, wounded but alive. Hayes covered him, gunning down two constructs with precision bursts. They were outnumbered, outmatched, yet they held the line. And then something changed. The architect hesitated. The humans were not falling. They were adapting. They fought with desperation, yes, but also with creativity, with unity, with rage born of generations of being told they did not belong in this galaxy. The architect's voice returned, quieter now. You are not what we expected. Blackwell stood atop the shattered remains of a guardian, breathing hard, blood on her face. Yeah, that's what they all say. A deep silence followed. Then the light faded from the walls. The constructs dissolved. The trial was over. The architect withdrew into the shadows, its voice echoing through the chamber once more. Then go. Take your place. But know this. You are invaders now. The fleet above Vakesh received the signal. Mission complete. Captain Blackwell and her team emerged onto the surface beneath a sky clearing of fire. The Nexus was gone. The Asian shattered. The architects, waiting. But they had not conquered humanity. And the message was clear. We are the invaders. Not because they craved war, but because they refused to be shackled by ancient rules and silent tyrants. Because they would tear down the old to build something new. Because in the vacuum left by dying gods, someone had to rise. The galaxy watched and trembled. Humanity had arrived, and it was never going back.